Good afternoon. It looks like we have quite a few attendees in the house as well as our panelists. So I wanted to welcome everyone to our event. Happy official Autism and Neurodiversity Acceptance Month. I'm Erin Helmholtz. I'm with Texas Career Engagement and joined by the staff for Longhorn Ties, Catherine and Ashley. We're so excited to be here today with three awesome panelists that are going to tell us a little bit more about their journeys, their experience with disclosure, and I can't wait to get to hear their insight. We will definitely have room for you to ask any questions at the end. This is a Zoom webinar, so feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A button down at the bottom of the webinar. And to get us started today, I would love to start off just by sharing the definition of neurodiversity as well as disclosure. So we're all on the same page about these terms we're going to be using throughout the panel today. So first, neurodiversity. We recognize that neurodiversity celebrates the natural differences in the human brain's wiring, and individuals may self-diagnose or self-identify as neurodivergent with a long list, some including autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, OCD, social pragmatic communication disorder, Tourette syndrome, and more. So we definitely see neurodiversity as diversity and want to celebrate that within the UT community and beyond. And when we talk about disclosure in general, a basic definition of disclosure is informing someone or making something known. So for example, you get to decide if you want to disclose your neurodiversity or your neurodiverse identity to an employer. So with that, I would love to open up our conversation. So like I mentioned, my name is Erin. I will be moderating this conversation. And before we jump into some questions, some of which were submitted by students ahead of time, I'm going to allow our Ask Our panelists to introduce themselves so we can hear a little bit more about them. So whoever wants to kick off is welcome to start.
Just quickly before we get started, Erin, and I'll introduce myself as well. There's a setting that's keeping, I think, some of the participants from turning their cameras on. Yeah.
Okay, I will work on that in the meantime.
Okay, in the meantime, hi, my name is Julia. I did not go to UT. And I actually went to school up in Washington. I currently live in Seattle and I work for Lions and Tigers, which is a consulting firm. And they hooked me up with this panel. Also, apologies if you hear my cat. She's having her morning zoomies and it's very loud. But yeah, it's nice to meet everybody virtually. And I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Jillian. I work in human resources, but I'm taking a little bit of a sabbatical right now. I identify as an autistic woman, and I'm really excited for this panel and to celebrate neurodiversity, and just want to thank you for having me here. Also, I went to school at Washington State University.
Wonderful. And I think that leaves Yasmin.
Hello, my name is Yasmin, and I am a somewhat recent UT graduate. I graduated in May 2020 with a degree in biomedical engineering, and currently I work at a company that evaluates scientific journals, so I'm a journal quality auditor. But before that, I worked at a school as a biology teacher. I did that for 1.5 years, and I'm excited to join you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those great introductions. I believe, I'm so sorry, but I don't think I can change those video settings on my end. So we might stick more with audio today. I'll continue working on that in the background just in case we can figure that out. But thank you for sticking with us through these technical difficulties a few years into this pandemic. So wonderful. One of the first questions I would love to ask to kick us off today is, what factors do you consider when deciding whether or not to disclose to an employer? I'll also drop the questions in the chat.
I'll kick off that question. Being in human resources, have done a lot of full cycle recruiting, and I have been present in the conversations with hiring managers when we're evaluating candidates and the things that they observe and they factor into their decision making. And I wish I had a better answer, but there's a lot of bias in the recruiting process that's been really disappointing. And it's a pleasure to be an HR professional and try to bring more fairness into that process, but I'm just not confident in every company's ability to be fair. And so I definitely don't disclose during the recruiting process, knowing the biases that people have. I may change that approach in the future, and you don't want to work for an employer that is discriminatory, and so that can be self-selecting. But I would just say, like, if you really want a job, I would choose not to disclose in the recruiting process and wait until if you need accommodation, wait until you're on board. I have recently gotten diagnosed, so I haven't had the opportunity to disclose to an employer, but it is something that I enjoy living my most authentic life, and I would foresee probably choosing to disclose 6 months to a year into a position. That would be something that I would hope that I'm at a place at a company where I would feel like I'd be accepted. So yeah, that's a bit of advice and just a personal opinion there.
Someone with ADHD, I think it adds an extra layer of difficulty because ADHD so closely impacts your ability to work and function, and I'm using quotation marks, you can't see it, normally. So part of that is when I was recently doing my job hunt, which is, if anyone tells you it's not like a soul-sucking horrible experience, they're lying to you. So it's like you're doing, I was doing 5 or 6 interviews a week, just talking to people. And in some interviews, I really was thinking, should I disclose this information because it does affect, my work scheduling, my productivity, sometimes just my ability to complete tasks. So that's hard because I feel like if I'm only disclosing the things about my neurodivergency that might make work difficult for me, that's not the full story. Because, there should be equal value put in the fact that I can disclose, hey, I work a lot faster than other people because I can become hyper-focused, or I see things sometimes and I can pick out details that other people can't because of, I probably think, my neurodivergency. But I think to a lot of employers that won't hold as much weight as me saying, sometimes I'll forget to do something for weeks on end, and then I just will see it in front of me and I won't do it. And that's really difficult because you want to try and find a job that supports all of you and understands all of you. But I think it's hard as someone with ADHD because it's all of me includes someone who sometimes will forget things or overlook things. And, employers don't really want to hear that. So I think, I wish I had a better answer to this question, but I think it's kind of about the vibe. If you're in your interview, and maybe not your first interview, but maybe your second interview, I would say, if you feel safe with that person, safe enough to say something, that's a really good indicator that this would be a good fit for you. And B, say as much or as little as you want. You don't have to tell them I have ADHD, so I forget everything all the time. Like, no, you don't have to say that. You can just say like I have ADHD. And I think, at least for me, that's been something that's difficult about disclosure, because I do like, people knowing things about me, and I like talking about myself. But it's the kind of thing where people don't actually have to know everything about you immediately when they meet you. And I think neurodivergent people, we love saying everything about ourselves as soon as we meet someone. And I just, it was a learning process to be like, you know what, they don't need to know the ins and outs and nuances of my specific neurodivergency. And maybe they just have to know that I am. So yeah.
I really relate to a lot of what Julia said about, wanting to share this key part of my identity, and then realizing that that's maybe not in our best interests. So my perspective on this is that you certainly should not disclose early on, because like it or not, people will prejudge you, and you want to be able to give them the chance to get to know you as you are. They accept your traits, and later, maybe if you want to put a label on that, then they'll be like, oh yeah, that's part of this person, versus seeing you as the autistic in the workplace. And so the way that I handle disclosure in my current workplace is I just picked a job that thankfully is very autistic friendly. They actually asked me in the interview if I would be okay with a job that had minimal social contact, that they knew that that wasn't for everybody. And I was like, yeah, that's perfect. Before that, I worked at a school, and I did not disclose during the recruiting process at all, nor did I tell the principal. But the person that I did tell, though, was the department head, because I was in the science department and we had meetings together with all the other science teachers. And so I figured in smaller groups, some of my traits might show up unexpectedly. I try to mask what I can to get things going smoothly, but I know that days are stressful and sometimes things will get through. And sometimes I want things to not be masked. So it helped to facilitate that by telling my department head, because I felt like I could count on him. If something came up with another teacher, he could kind of smooth things over. I could rely on him to help me out with the social aspect of interacting with them, the other people at the school. And so that was important to me. I don't think that it would have been helpful to tell the principal, because it wasn't as much of a personal interaction. So I guess what I would say is, if you're going to be interacting with somebody very regularly and they're in a position to be able to help you if certain unexpected needs come up, it's a good idea to disclose then to them, maybe not right away, but after they've gotten the chance to get to know you a little bit. And if you feel like you connect with some people at work that you feel like they will accept you and that you can bring some benefit, that might sound a little bit vague, but one important person that I told was the 504 coordinator at the school. And so they handle accommodations for certain children. And she was very supportive. And not only that, she was able to pinpoint to me specific needs of certain students that I had. And I could relate to that more and get a better idea of what I could do to help them. And another person that I told was a special ed aide who would come into my classroom. And this was important because he had another student, not one of my students, that was autistic. And he asked if he could bring the student over to talk to me because autistic role models are important for children as they grow up. And it meant a lot to me to be able to talk with him and show him that, yeah, we can go out there and do things. It's not the way that the media beats down on us or society beats down on us for, not being able to do things. We can accomplish very much. And so I felt like both of us benefited from that interaction. So that's one path that Disclosure led me down. But again, that's because I felt like I could trust these people. And then after that, it got easier because I was there for several months. And after a while, people start getting used to your individual quirks. And they do that for everyone, not just ND people. Everybody has their own character, and some people are more characters than others. I mean, especially at the school, there were very unique individuals. And so they just start to see you as one of them, just, a character, maybe, but not in a negative way. So I think that that's kind of the gradual approach that I would take to it. And yeah.
Wonderful. I got some really good insights from all three of those answers. I think some key takeaways for me are you get to be in charge of the decision, right? There is some strategy behind it, thinking about how you could be most supportive, identifying who would be the most supportive people to tell. But also, I love that, Yasmin, recognizing that you maybe don't have to know, or you won't know how you work in every workplace before you're there, and remembering that everyone takes some time to transition and get comfortable in a new role, I think is a very helpful perspective. So really love those first answers there. Our second question is, how has your neurodiversity helped you in the workplace, and how has it challenged you? Same thing, I'll open it up for anyone that would like to respond.
I can answer first. So I come from a journalism background originally, and so it is a very fast-paced, high-stress, high-delivery, social bonding type of job to have. So for a while, I really thrived on that, and I really, really enjoyed all those aspects of it because as someone, I can recognize now, I wasn't diagnosed at the time, but I can recognize now as someone with ADHD, I had to do a job that kind of gave me enough dopamine and like interested me and kept me engaged enough, or else I just wouldn't do it. And so I came from that field, but it's really easy to burn out when when your motivation for having a job is just enjoying it like to the death, to the point where like you could die from the amount of like stimuli that's happening. And so transitioning, I had to kind of take a step back and think like, is this healthy for like me as a person, or is this just the only thing that stimulates my mind enough to not feel boring? And so I had to kind of transition into taking a lot of the skills and things I enjoyed about working in journalism, but finding something that wasn't as like prone to burnout and wouldn't leave me like doing all-nighters, and just like I felt like I was never catching a breath. And so my neurodiversity helped me because I was able to hyper focus on these tasks because they mattered so much to me, but it was a challenge because it meant that I was often putting like my health aside and just unable to prioritize anything but that. And so I had to really look at like balancing, like the idea that a job can sometimes be boring is a good thing, because it means that then you get to rest and don't have to constantly be going and going and going because you're so scared that if you stop, you'll never start again, which is such an issue that most people with ADHD deal with, which is like, I have this momentum and the second it stops, it's like, I forget it exists. So realizing that the job will be there and it may not always be, you know, super engaging, but it will always be there. That was something that was a big challenge for me, transitioning out of journalism and into, like, I do communications work now. So it's a little different. It's kind of similar, but no one is like dying if I don't get my Instagram post up on time. So it's a lot better.
I am glad that I wasn't diagnosed until later in life, because I think if I had been diagnosed with autism earlier, I might not have had the confidence to go into human resources and be the interaction, like the people interaction. I might have thought I couldn't do that. And looking back on things, I'm like, oh, I do see where I had hiccups at work and there were subtle cues that people were telling me that I didn't quite pick up on and found out afterwards that led to some miscommunications. But I think that a lot of autistic people share a trait, which is a strong sense of fairness and justice. And that really helps me in terms of implementing policy and finding the best solution. And I feel like a lot of managers will come to me very emotional about something and wanting to do something that wasn't consistent with what we had already decided to do. And so I feel like being autistic helps me see things clearly and logically, and help me like create a better like workplace and just wanting things to be fair. I love rules. And also HR, I'm often delivering unpopular news. So whatever the employer decides to do, somebody's not happy about it, and staying principled and not taking those things personally and doing my job. I think it helps me in a lot of difficult situations where where other people might find I see other people caring a little bit more about oh my gosh, this employee doesn't like me. Where I know being in HR, 10% of employees are not going to like me. So so I've found that it really helps with the core of my job. And then I have to work harder for, I have a formula for building trust with people. And I have like a huge Excel spreadsheet where I record what people tell me about like what their kids' names are and their sports. And then before I meet with them, I go look and I'm like, oh yeah, they told me this detail. And I set up like regular one-on-ones with people that I need to build trust with. And they don't know that I'm just like kind of following a formula, but it works really well. And so there's just like little things like that I do to mask and kind of help that. And so I would say, that's kind of my experience in the workplace with what goes well and what can be a little challenging.
I would say that my neurodiversity neurodivergence, because I'm one person, has helped me in the workplace because I'm detail oriented and I want to get things right. I am very concerned with accuracy, and that's to an extent that most people seem not to be. So I'm good at catching errors and things like that. Now, unlike Jillian, I was diagnosed as a kid. I was 13. And so I think that did impact my confidence sometimes. But I'm glad that I managed to get past that, because if I doubted myself too much, I would not be able to take the leaps that I have. It doesn't sound like teaching is a good career for somebody like me, or at least that's what I thought before, because it involves public speaking every day, most of the day. And just a lot of social interactions, generating, well, let's just say my speaking algorithm got quite a workout. I didn't think that I had that in me before, but one thing that I like to say is don't take your limitations seriously. And so, sure, I was challenged very heavily, but it also showed me that I can do a lot. And I think that that's something that you can take pride in when you discover. And so I want other autistics who are going out there into the workplace to have that kind of experience, realizing that they can take on more than they thought maybe.
Awesome. Again, such good insights here. Like, I think I should be taking notes, the things that are really helpful. Next up, I would love to hear if anyone has felt this. If you haven't, no worries, but how have you managed any stress or anxiety around disclosure or making that decision to disclose or not? And if not, we can move on to the next question, which is, what do you wish people knew about disclosure?
So all throughout college, I had accommodations through the Office of the Disability. And so did a lot of my friends. And something that I understood really early on, and something that I wish other people could understand more, is you are legally protected no matter how much disclosure you want to give to anyone who is not in charge of your disability accommodations. And it's the same at work. You're legally protected against this discrimination, I believe. Not so you should be if you're not, but I think a lot of my friends would have a tendency to, if they were emailing for an extension, to give all of the sordid details of, whatever difficult things were happening in their life. And I just really think that the main thing about disclosure is it's absolutely no one's business except yours, what is limiting you and why you need the accommodations that you need. And I think especially I want students to hear this, because I'm sure many of the students who are here have these accommodations. And, sometimes I think you think it's going to go better to tell your professor absolutely every reason why you missed your tests and you have to make it up. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to do that. You don't have to put out there everything that has to do with your neurodivergence or your disability. You don't have to put all that out there and, to feel like they're not going to believe me otherwise, or they're not going to care if I don't tell them exactly what happened. And I think that's not fair to us, because the whole reason that this is a protected class is because we shouldn't have to tell people. We shouldn't have to dredge up all of our trauma and our difficulties just to, get to take a test 24 hours later. So I think the main thing I wish people knew about disclosure is it's not always necessary and it's always your choice. And sometimes I think people put the result ahead of themselves and they say, well, I just need this accommodation. I don't care how I get it. But it's like, we were protected by those accommodations and we don't have to disclose everything, and we don't need to. It almost feels like begging or like using parts of ourselves that are, that we wouldn't tell. I wouldn't tell like the grocery checkout clerk, I slept for 48 hours and that's why I didn't do something. So why would I tell my professor that? So yeah, I think disclosure is a very personal thing. And I think institutions try and make it so it's not, And I don't agree with that, and I don't think that's how it should be.
All right. I love that advice, Julia. I think that is really important to remember that there's not a right or wrong way to do this. And I know so many support staff on this call are happy to work with you to maybe decide what decision is right for you, or kind of brainstorm strategies for how you could approach this topic. So love that insight. The next question we have is, what do you wish you had known as a student or recent grad entering the workforce?
Oh, man. Okay, so you might have a lot of expectations and dreams as a student. You might think, oh yeah, I'm totally going to finish within the 4 years. That may not happen. That is totally fine. I took longer to finish my degree. Another thing that you might think is that you're going to work necessarily in the field that you studied, and that has not really been the case for me. And it turns out, as you enter the workforce and talk to your colleagues, you talk to your coworkers, you're going to find out that a lot of them are not doing what they studied in college exactly. So don't get too attached to the idea. I know that it's something that bothered me a lot when I graduated and was looking for jobs. And I had this expectation. I had an image in my mind of what I was going to do. And it turns out that reality is pretty different from that. So I guess just be mentally prepared.
I wish someone had prepared me for how difficult it is to actually get a job. Like, getting a job feels like a job. And I think that that's even harder when you're neurodivergent, especially if you have issues with motivation or socialization or anything that comes with that, because the interview process for many jobs is just like brutal. Like, it's like 4 interviews, a cover letter, a test project, like a 8th interview, like a panel interview, and and then they pay you like $30,000 a year after that. So I think that I wish I had understood how it can be sort of genuinely damaging to your psyche when you're looking for jobs. And I think that a lot of, like, it's not a process that's made for neurodivergent people, just like how most things aren't, but it's not a process that is made with neurodivergent people in mind. It's not a comfortable process. And the best advice that I got was from my mom, because I was just like, I hate doing these interviews. I'm so tired of it. Like, it feels so fake and forced. And I'm like, I feel like I'm masking so hard just to get through these interviews. I'm like putting on a different voice. And my mom was like, it's just practice. Like, even if you don't get the job, you have to think of it as practice. You're just practicing a skill, and it'll get easier as time goes on. And that kind of reframed how I was thinking about it, because before I was like, every interview is life or death. If I don't get this job, I'm out on the street in a month. And now I'm kind of like, I'll take the interview, and it's good practice. It's practicing. And it's unfortunate that we have to mask as hard as we do when we do interviews, but like, that's the reality of the situation we're in. And, that takes practice, and it's exhausting, but you get better at it over time. I just wish I had known that coming out of school, because it's a lot of work just to get the interviews, just to do the applications, just to make a portfolio, all that stuff. So be easy on yourself when you're looking for a job, because looking for a job was harder than now having a job, honestly.
I agree with everything that Yasmin and Julia said. There's a lot of tendency in the interview process to people tend to really have a bias towards extroversion. And so like the interview is just interesting things that have nothing to do with the job. People are like, oh, they were so bubbly. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know bubbly was a qualification for this job. But so it does feel performative, and that can be very exhausting. I'd also just like, I feel like the new generations, it's really exciting to see. I think that y'all know this better than I did, and is that there's just no perfect job. Like, our personal lives are so important, and we want, you know, the best jobs possible, but to just know that like you might think the company is really great, and a year in being like, okay, here's the downsides. And that I think younger people especially tend to maybe take the first job offer that they receive. And just, I would like to give everybody the confidence and pep talk to interview those companies as hard as they're interviewing you. Like, there's bad managers out there, there's unethical companies. Be asking tough questions, really observe things, and when you get an offer, really consider like, do I actually want to work here, or am I just excited that I got my first job offer? So like, I would just say, I wish I hadn't taken the first couple job offers that I got. I wish I had, you know, known things. So like, be researching what is it like, and just know that it's an amazing market for candidates right now. Not to say that it's not a brutal process and it doesn't take a long time to get a job, but they need you more than you need them. And so please consider that.
Very, very helpful insights, especially from an HR professional. I think we need a little pocket, Jillian, to put in our pockets before we walk into interviews. Love that. Next up, I would love to hear, are there any important skills that really help you succeed at work? We've heard a couple examples of things that you have done, but I was curious to hear if there are any others that come to mind for you.
I guess I would say being able to prioritize, because you're going to get a lot of requests for different types of tasks to be done. They're going to be different things that you have to work on. And sometimes you are not given an order in which to work on them. And you can't go asking your supervisor about every little thing. And so you have to, or at least what I found helpful was to make a list and figure out what order was optimal for me to work on the tasks. And sometimes you won't get a metric for knowing, okay, I did well enough. And you have to look within yourself and think, okay, I will be satisfied if I get these things done today. And then measure yourself against that. I think that helps if you have a little bit more unstructured of a system and you need that structure, you have to make it for yourself.
I think a really important skill is learning how to say no at work. And I think especially when you're just coming into the workforce, you don't have that sense of empowerment yet, to be like able to evaluate how much you do and whether or not you could take on more. Because I think there's this perception, especially now with remote work, that if you're not constantly working, you're slacking off. But if you ask anyone who worked in an office pre-pandemic and you ask them how many hours in your workday do you think you actually were working, most of them will be like maybe four or five. But just because you have downtime during your day does not mean that that's an opportunity to take on more tasks and do more things. And I think it can be really hard to say no, especially as a younger person in a role, because you're like, oh God, I'm new. And I don't know, my mind immediately is like, they're going to fire you for not wanting to do one thing. And I know that that's not true, but it is okay to speak up and be like, I'm at capacity for what I'm able to do today because I need to eat and sit on my couch sometimes. And that's okay, but it's honestly terrifying. Like I had to do it the other day. It was really scary because there's this like there's this feeling, I think, that you're never working hard enough. And I think we all have that, but especially when you're neurodivergent, because your work often doesn't look how other people's work does, you're like, I'm doing something wrong, or I'm not doing things the way that they would want me to. So to say no on top of that is just like, well, I'm just being a terrible employee. And you're not. Like, learning how to say no is super, super important at work, because people will always, if you're good at your job, people will ask you to do other things. And that's why they're asking. It's not. And so saying no isn't going to hurt you. It's actually a good thing that they're asking. And it's a good thing that you're able to say, not this week, can't do it. Thanks.
Those are some powerful skills. And I definitely agree in the transition, especially moving from college into employment, there is a lot less structure where we're coming from a place of, I clearly understand what an A means in a class and what a B means and a C means. And sometimes you do have to identify how you define success for yourself and how you define that with your managers, right? How you're meeting goals, how you're progressing. So very, very helpful there. We are going to open up to Q&As from the audience in a moment here, but before Jillian has to hop off, I did just want to ask, do you have any final advice for students, things that you wish you had known, or words of wisdom for our students at UT today?
I just love neurodiversity, and I think back to the parts in my career where I was like most celebrated or got most like awards or recognition, and I think back and I'm like, oh, it's because my special interests aligned with this task at work. And like there are things that I'm like, I was only able to accomplish that because I'm neurodivergent. And there are so many things that like clicked into place that were just really exciting to learn about myself. And yeah, I just think that the workplace truly is stronger when it is inclusive. And yeah, I'm excited to see more companies prioritizing that or recognizing it. Like there's so much neurodiversity already in the workplace, and finding ways to accommodate. And so I just wish everybody the best of luck. And I can share my email too if anyone has any questions and wants like some HR tips about, interviewing or whatever. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Erin, I saw a question come in the chat a little earlier on, asking if there were telltale signs in employers that they may be closeted ableists. So this could be used in our favor to evaluate how much to share, if we share at all.
I would say you can tell a lot actually from a job description. There's some key language in job descriptions that it's actually like an indicator that it's an ableist company. So things like that would be like able to keep up in a fast-paced, demanding environment. If they have that in the job description, run. Like if they are going to just keep asking you to do things. If they have anything about able to take on last-minute tasks, able to also, this is a ableist for people more with physical disabilities, but if they're like able to lift 50 pounds, like red flag. But any kind of language in the job posting that makes it seem as if it's a demanding and uncompromising position in which you will be asked to do things very last minute, it is probably not going to be a workplace that is accepting of people's differences and people's different ability levels, because they're going to be demanding that you complete things on a timeline in a very specific way, and there is not a lot of room discussion around that. I would say that that's a big indicator for me. Like I won't apply to places if they have that kind of language.
I'll say just from the career coach perspective that I really appreciated the advice we heard earlier today to remember that you are interviewing organizations as much as they're interviewing you. So coming with questions prepared ahead of time, whether or not you choose to disclose during the process about what things are important to you in terms of a manager or their style. Maybe if you need flexible work arrangements, is that something that the company values or is open to? Other things that I think about probably tend to be, tell me about kind of workplace culture or yeah, there's so many different directions we can go there, but one piece that is within your control is what questions you ask and come prepared with. And I think that can be a really helpful way to get to know both the individuals that you're interviewing with, but also the organization as a whole and how they're, if they're walking their talk. And I also want to mention things like ERGs or employee resource groups are one way that a lot of larger organizations are celebrating diversity and can be one way to kind of signal that they are supporting and celebrating neurodivergent, queer, people of color, you know, all of those employees within their organization. And I do want to invite if any other attendees have other questions, you're welcome to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A section. If not, we have a couple more questions we can ask you. But I would love to hear, what does neurodiversity mean to you? We've talked a little bit about it today, but I'm curious to hear from an individual perspective.
Yasmin, you want to take this or should I?
Oh, sure. Okay, so I love biology, and one of the things that's so beautiful about it is how there are countless variations in so many ways that might not even occur to a person. There's so much left to discover. And so similarly, there's so much diversity. Well, humans are animals, and in the same way, we have so much variation, so much natural variation, and to see all that variation is beautiful. And that's something that I think we as a society should appreciate more. It takes all kinds to make a world. That's kind of cliche, but it really does make the world more interesting. It makes conversations more stimulating, and it's one of the reasons that humans have been able to accomplish all that they have been. Humans are not very strong compared to a lot of other animals. Our strength, our beauty is how we're able to work together and build on each other's knowledge to create something more. And that's why neurodiversity is so important, in my opinion.
I think to me, just on a personal level, it was an answer to a lot of shame that I had been feeling over things that I didn't understand why certain things were never easy for me, and why certain things just made more sense to me than they would to other people, or why I became attached to certain things that other people didn't, or like just like the basic things like why I couldn't keep my house clean, things like that. And I think that this, to me, getting diagnosed didn't change me at all, but it gave me this feeling like I could give myself some grace and some understanding around why I am the way I am. And that was really special for me to be able to finally have an answer and finally have like a jumping off point and a place to start. And so I think that everyone kind of deserves to be able to have that feeling. And I think that being given those reasons and that explanation is what has helped me kind of come into my own power when it comes to what I can and can't do, and kind of working with myself as I am instead of just wishing that I was different. And I think that that's what has made me, you know, thrive in the environments that I'm in.
I love that. We're all animals, and give yourself grace. We tied that up with a neat little bow. I did see we have one additional question in the chat. How does the
That might be me.
Okay,
Is that my
sorry.
question?
Yes.
I can ask it. I'm wondering, and I think it may be helpful for people to hear how the process of disclosure or seeking accommodations in a workplace differs from that process at a school or university environment. So, you know, Julia mentioned earlier going through the disabilities office and that kind of being a known place where you go, share documentation, and then they grant you these accommodations that you have this legal right to. So I'm wondering, in a workplace, like, what documentation is required? Is any, you know, do you share diagnostic information or just state that you need accommodations? You know, without having a place like a disabilities office, who do you go to if there's not an HR department? I know Yasmin shared a little bit about people she chose to disclose with within her school, but just thinking about how that process looks different in the workplace.
And I'm just going to add, if you know, because I think earlier, you know, you both referenced like from your experience, and both of your experiences were a little different. So if you, you know, if you are aware if there is a specific process.
Personally, I'm not. I've actually never heard of anybody who had to file any sort of documentation. That's not to say that I don't think that that's possible, but I think because there's so many different types of workplace, it would make sense to me if that meant that there were different levels to how rigid and regimented the accommodation process was. But I can say I work at like a mid-sized company, and I'm unaware of any sort of documentation that would be required to get accommodations. I think it's sort of just like talk to your manager about it, and like if you need it, it's pretty much granted. And I feel very lucky to be working at that kind of place where it's just kind of like you tell them what you need and they give it to you, and it doesn't have to be this like long bureaucratic process of like prove to us that you really deserve it and that you're bad enough to need it. And it's like, no, it's just like I kind of need this, and my manager's like, yeah, sure. But no, I'm not aware of any sort of documentation or specific legal process for disclosure at work.
Yeah, I can share from the coaching side of things. I think it may be helpful to hear that there are both formal and informal accommodations in most workplaces. So if there is an HR department, that is typically where a lot of folks will go. Working at UT, they do ask for formal paperwork, right? And want to know that there is maybe a doctor's note or a diagnosis before certain actions can be taken. But if you work individually with your manager, it's very easy to get, you know, a lamp rather than overhead lights if that's too stimulating for you, or potentially come up with a flexible work arrangement that really suits your style. Some other strategies of informal accommodations can be things like setting aside an hour every day on your calendar where no one can schedule a meeting with you, so that you kind of take stock of, are you meeting your goals? Are you getting your tasks done, right? And that is something you do not have to register with an HR or talk to a supervisor about specifically. But one resource that I know we share often with students that I absolutely recommend is JAN, the Jobs Accommodation Network, that has a lot of examples of what different folks with different types of disabilities can and have requested from employers. And that can be a helpful starting place in thinking about what you might need or what would help you be even more successful in the transition or in a new job. Thanks, Ashley, for dropping that in the chat. In our last couple of minutes here, any other advice for students or things that you would like to share?
Okay, so during my time as a college student, I dealt with imposter syndrome a lot. I felt like somehow I slipped through the cracks and managed to get my foot in the door. I managed to be at UT, following my dream, doing this degree plan, and I felt like maybe I wasn't at the level that my peers were. And that was not necessarily true, but still I had the imposter syndrome. So one way that I dealt with it was being like, okay, yeah, I'm a scam. I don't know how I got in here, but I did. And I'm going to be the best scam artist that I can be. Now, I mean, you're not a scam. You got in through legitimate means. You're going to accomplish great things through legitimate means. But if it helps your mindset, if it helps to deal with the imposter syndrome, think of it that way.
I would also add to that, it took me a long time to recognize that my imposter syndrome meant that I was constantly seeking approval from an institution that inherently would never accept me as I was. And that's something that I think a lot of people who have marginalized identities have to come to terms with, is it's like, I'm striving to be recognized by an institution that maybe like 100 years ago wouldn't have accepted me, just wouldn't have let me attend. And so if that's where I'm basing my worth, is like on the acceptance. Oh my God, sorry, it's hailing really bad here, but like really bad. But if I'm like pinning my self-worth to the institution and then I graduate, where's my self-worth? And so it's like, I think that's the thing that I had to interrogate with my imposter syndrome, is I was like, why can't I just be good enough for me, right? And I think that that's hard, but it's necessary.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and telling us a little bit about your stories. I know I got so much out of our conversation today. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared with our students. We will go ahead and stop recording the event. I'll hang out for a couple minutes if anyone has any additional questions they'd like to ask, but a huge thank you to Yasmin, Julia, and we are so appreciative of everything that you shared today. So thank you so much.